It was a quiet afternoon at a small cafe, tucked away on a peaceful corner of the city. The air was crisp, and the soft hum of distant traffic filled the background. Inside, the smell of freshly brewed coffee lingered, blending with the faint aroma of pastries. The cafe was nearly empty, save for a few people quietly enjoying their drinks or absorbed in their own thoughts. Mel, a man in his mid-40s, walked into the cafe with a calm demeanor, as though the world's noise couldn't touch him. A regular, he had come for his usual midday escape. He ordered his coffee at the counter and took a seat by the window, settling into his chair with a sigh of relief. He was someone who had weathered his fair share of storms in life. Yet, despite it all, there was an air of quiet wisdom about him, a kindness reflected in his eyes that drew people in without him ever needing to say much. The bell above the cafe door jingled, drawing Mel's attention. A young woman entered, her eyes filled with a kind of heaviness that was hard to miss. Her hands clutched a small, worn purse, and her shoulders sagged as though carrying an invisible burden. She walked past the counter, her gaze lost in thought, and took a seat at a table near the back. Mel couldn't help but notice the sadness radiating from her. It reminded him of moments in his own life when he had felt overwhelmed and alone, unsure where to turn or who to trust. Mel didn't immediately approach her, but after a few minutes of glancing her way, he noticed her eyes were misty, the faintest signs of anxious tears. Something stirred in him, a deep, almost instinctual desire to help, as though he could see the pain in her more clearly than others might. After a brief hesitation, he decided to do what he had done in the past during moments of uncertainty. He stood up, walked over to her table, and smiled gently. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice soft, yet warm. The girl looked up, startled, as though she hadn't expected anyone to notice her, let alone approach her. She hesitated for a moment, but the sincerity in his voice and the kindness in his eyes gave her a sense of comfort. "Sure," she whispered, pushing the chair across from her out slightly. As the girl wiped her eyes, a soft smile started to form on her face. It wasn't a happy smile, but one of quiet recognition. She looked at Mel, as if seeing him in a new light. There was something in his presence, something about the way he had listened, without judgment or hurry, that made her feel less alone. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I didn't expect to feel lighter." Mel nodded, giving her a warm, understanding look. "Sometimes, just saying it out loud helps. You don't have to carry it by yourself." The girl exhaled deeply, feeling a sense of release. In that moment, there was a shift. Her posture was a little less slumped, her eyes a little less clouded. It was as though, by sharing her burden, she had found the first step toward lifting it. After a pause, Mel shifted in his chair, as if contemplating something. "You know," he began slowly, "forgiveness can be one of the hardest things to grasp. It's easy to think you need to deserve it, but that's not how it works." The girl's eyes softened, intrigued by his words. "Forgiveness ... You mean from others?" "Yes, but also from yourself," Mel replied gently. "We often forget that part. We expect ourselves to be perfect, or at least to be worthy of forgiveness. But sometimes, grace doesn't work that way. It's about accepting the parts of us we're not proud of, and finding a way to let go of the guilt." The girl was quiet for a long moment, her mind turning over his words. She had always thought that to be forgiven, she had to prove herself first, to be good enough in some way. But Mel's perspective was different. It wasn't about earning forgiveness. It was about allowing it to come. "I never thought about it like that," the girl said, almost to herself. "That maybe I don't have to carry all of this weight alone, or that I don't have to prove myself worthy of it." Mel smiled softly, his eyes filled with compassion. "Exactly. It's a hard lesson, but once you understand it, it can change everything." For the first time, the girl felt a sense of possibility, not just in her healing, but in her life moving forward. The idea of self-forgiveness felt like a distant dream, but now it was starting to seem like something within reach. As the conversation continued, they shared more about their lives, their struggles, and the small victories they had each achieved over time. There was a deep, unspoken connection that formed between them, a sense of mutual understanding that felt rare and profound. The girl found herself laughing at some of Mel's gentle anecdotes, his quiet humor drawing her in despite herself. It was as if he had a way of lightening even the heaviest of topics. And with every word, she felt herself coming back to life in small, subtle ways. Unbeknownst to them, their conversation hadn't gone unnoticed. A few other patrons in the cafe, who had initially been absorbed in their own worlds, began to listen in subtly. They weren't eavesdropping, just observing the quiet exchange taking place. One of the women, sitting at the next table, glanced over at Mel and the girl. She had been watching them for a while, sensing the atmosphere of calm and understanding that seemed to settle over their table. It was a rare thing seeing two people connect so genuinely. It made her heart feel lighter too, and for a moment, she smiled to herself. As the conversation began to wind down, the girl looked at Mel, her expression more peaceful than when she had walked in. "I don't know what to say. I just feel like I've been heard, like I don't have to hide anymore." Mel gave her an encouraging look. "You don't have to hide," he said simply, "and you don't have to carry it alone. Sometimes, the world feels heavy, but you'd be surprised how many people are willing to help, even if it's in the smallest ways." The girl nodded slowly, her heart swelling with gratitude. She wasn't entirely healed, she knew that, but today had given her something she hadn't had in a long time: hope. Hope that things could change, that healing was possible, and that there were people willing to walk beside her, even if just for a little while. Mel stood up to leave, his coffee long finished. Before he walked away, he turned back to the girl, who was still sitting at the table, lost in thought. "Remember," he said with a soft smile, "sometimes all it takes is one person to remind you that it's okay to let go of the things you can't change. And sometimes that one person is you." The girl looked up at him, her expression thoughtful. She wasn't sure if she had fully absorbed everything he had shared, but she was starting to see the first glimmers of a future where she could let go of the past, a future where grace, forgiveness, and healing could be hers. Mel gave her one last kind smile and walked out of the cafe, leaving behind the warmth of his presence and the quiet ripple of change he had set in motion. After Mel left, the cafe seemed to return to its usual hum. Yet, the girl felt different. Her mind buzzed with the words Mel had shared, and her heart felt lighter, as though a weight she hadn't fully realized was there had been lifted. She sat in silence for a while, contemplating everything that had transpired. She thought about the idea of grace, how it wasn't something you earned, but something you allowed yourself to receive. It had seemed so elusive before, but now it was starting to feel within reach. Maybe she wasn't as broken as she had believed. Maybe, just maybe, she could find her way back to herself. She took a deep breath and smiled softly. For the first time in a long time, it felt like there was hope on the horizon. The next few days passed slowly, but the girl noticed a shift in herself. She began to approach her struggles differently. Instead of seeing them as insurmountable obstacles, she saw them as parts of her journey, pieces of her story that didn't define her but that could shape her growth. She started to forgive herself for the mistakes she had made, no longer holding herself hostage to guilt. And when she found herself slipping into old patterns of self-doubt, she would remember Mel's words about grace and self-forgiveness. Slowly, they became a mantra, a gentle reminder that healing didn't happen overnight, but that every step forward was a victory. Several weeks later, the girl found herself back in the same cafe, the place where everything had changed. It wasn't as quiet that afternoon. A few more people were seated, chatting over coffee or typing away on their laptops. But there was a sense of peace in the air, a calm that she carried with her now, wherever she went. She sat by the window, sipping her coffee, when she noticed a familiar face walk in. It was Mel. He seemed as calm and composed as he had the first time she'd met him. And as he made his way to the counter to order, the girl felt a sudden rush of gratitude. She wasn't sure if he remembered her, or if he would even recognize her after all this time, but she wanted to thank him, to express the difference he had made in her life, even in such a small moment. She stood up, her heart pounding with a mix of excitement and nervousness, and walked over to the counter where Mel was waiting. "Hi, Mel," the girl said, her voice a little shakier than she intended. "I don't know if you remember me, but I just wanted to say thank you for what you said that day. It really helped me." Mel turned, his expression softening when he recognized her. There was a spark of recognition in his eyes, followed by a warm smile. "Of course I remember you," he said, his voice as gentle as it had been before. "How are you doing?" The girl smiled, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. "I'm doing better. A lot better, actually. I've been working on forgiving myself. And, well, I just wanted to thank you for helping me see that it's possible." Mel nodded, his smile widening. "You've made the first step. The rest will come in time. I'm glad to hear you're doing better." The girl hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should stay or leave, but then decided to stay. She found herself drawn to the peaceful energy Mel exuded, and for a moment, they simply stood there in silence, sharing a moment of quiet understanding. "I never thought one conversation could change so much," she said softly, her voice tinged with wonder. Mel chuckled lightly. "Sometimes, all it takes is someone willing to listen and remind you of what you're capable of. You had it in you all along." The girl nodded slowly, her eyes shining with a quiet gratitude. "I think I'm finally starting to believe that." As the conversation wound down, the girl felt a sense of closure that wasn't about an ending, but about a new beginning. She had come full circle, from a place of isolation and guilt to a place of understanding and acceptance. Mel's kindness had sparked something within her, and now, she carried it with her ready to spread it to others, to be the same listening ear that he had been for her. As Mel turned to leave, she waved goodbye, a feeling of peace settling over her. She knew that there would be challenges ahead, but she also knew she wasn't facing them alone. The ripple of kindness, of compassion, of grace had begun, and it was far from over. Over time, the girl began to find peace in the act of listening, of offering the same compassion that had been shown to her. She realized that she didn't need to solve anyone's problems sometimes. Just being present was enough. Her life was no longer about searching for a grand solution to her pain. It was about embracing the journey and sharing it with others along the way. And just as Mel had once reminded her, she discovered that each small act of kindness, each moment of grace, rippled outward, touching lives in ways she couldn't always see. But she knew that it didn't matter. What mattered was that she was living her truth, that she was giving and receiving grace in equal measure. One evening, as the girl stood by the window of her apartment, looking out at the city below, she thought back to that quiet cafe. She remembered the girl who had walked in, burdened and lost, and the man who had taken a moment to listen. She thought about how that simple conversation had changed everything for her, and how now, she was part of that same ripple. Her heart swelled with gratitude for Mel, for the kindness of strangers, and for the strength she had found within herself. She understood now that healing wasn't a linear path. It was messy, unpredictable, and often uncertain, but it was also beautiful, because it was shaped by connection. As she looked out at the stars beginning to appear in the evening sky, she whispered to herself, "It's okay to not have all the answers. Sometimes, all we need is someone to listen." And with that, she felt a deep sense of peace settle in her heart. The next day, she returned to the cafe. She ordered her usual coffee, settled into her favorite corner by the window, and took a moment to look around. The cafe had become a symbol of her transformation, of that one pivotal moment, when she had been seen, heard, and understood. She took a sip of her coffee, feeling a quiet contentment. Life wasn't perfect, but it was hers to live. And as long as she could continue to listen, to offer kindness, and to allow grace into her life, she knew she would never be truly alone. It touches on the themes of personal growth, healing, and the power of human connection. It illustrates how small acts of kindness and understanding can ripple through lives, bringing healing and change. Thank you for letting me continue this journey with you. Let me know if you'd like to explore anything further or revisit any part of the story.